Oh, howdy all. Grab yourself a drink. It is time for a Path of Exile 2 discussion live stream today. Rather than do this as a recorded thing, I thought I would do it as a bit of a live stream just for something different. But fundamentally, the content's going to be the same. It will just be a little bit less tightly edited than my videos tend to be. We're going to be having a look at what's in patch 0.2.0e. Now, this has been live for 3¾ hours, and it doesn't look like there's any major performance issues associated with it. There are definitely some bugs. The boss of one of the zones in Act 3 is currently not not spawning, so that's a little bit crangled. But that's not one of the bosses that you really need to do at the moment, so it's something you can come back to later. It's not blocking your progression. It will, however, just be one of those silly things that will come up and will put you in a bad mood if it happens to you, because it is at the end of the Apex of Filth, and the Apex of Filth is not a short zone. So hopefully you don't fall foul of that, and I think they may have been on top of this. It seems like Groningen Games did put out a hotfix that they thought solved the problem, but there have been a couple of people that have been reporting continuing problems with it. All that said, the servers aren't on fire, so this is not one of those videos where I'm talking about some sort of major problems that have gone live with a patch. Anyways, Groningen Games have put out a couple of balance manifesto type documents about the changes they were planning here. A whole bunch of balance changes to the Sorceress, the bleed chaos inoculation changes, Huntress. Now, in warrior specific changes, and this is still the case in the patch notes, I don't know why this is listed as warrior specific. This is a major change to monsters that apply armor break to players. These monsters have had a smashing nerf bat hit. These monsters are going to be a lot less dangerous than they were. And ironically, this is more dangerous the less that you invest in armor, at least the old way that it worked. So 020 day 1, if you had only 10 armor on your character just by bad luck from having a particular piece of itemization that had some of it on it, that was causing you the problem that you could get armor broken, and that armor break would be 20% more physical damage that you'd take. 20% extra. I think it's in the shock layer. I could be wrong on that, but that's the way that I think it was. So that has definitely been changed, and that's a huge thing that is more of an impact if you're not a warrior. Other than that, there's a number of things that have gone on here. There's changes to a support gem that were added. This support gem has been restricted in what it will do, but a lot of people misread it, so we'll come to that in a sec. After that, a number of other things that have taken place. This was the original announcement of what they were going to do. Vast majority of this has actually been done. And then there was this second one, further changes from today. This is a big, big list of changes to speed of monsters, and that was the focus here. But the goal was not monsters across the board get minus 20% action speed or minus 20% movement speed or anything like that. The goal is that only those monsters that are intended to be super agile are going to be faster than players in general. Now, they haven't necessarily exactly hit that, but they've got the things that were the outliers, the things that were much faster than players could be. They're going to be easy. They're going to tend to be squishy monsters. That's their goal. So those monsters you can't ignore. Those monsters you have to kill. And at the same time, you also have a bunch of other monsters that are going to be slower than they were before, because those were the monsters that might have been 105% the speed of the player. So that meant they could inexorably chase you down, but they were also tough. A lot of the monsters that were 105% of the player's speed, they're now being, at least the plan is to pull them back to 95% of what the player's likely to be. And then that means that you've got more options for how you deal with them. They probably haven't hit everything on this, but that's their intention at least. One of the biggest changes is animation changes that have been going on. This one's an important one, and it's something where they're going with a lot of the human monsters. If you were slightly slower than these monsters, they could attack you, but then if you moved out of their way, they could immediately reinitiate pursuit of you, and so they would catch back up to you. And so the fact that you dodged them once doesn't really help you in the long run. They'll just chase you down. What they're doing now is making it so that if they swing at you, they are committed to the entire swing. So there's no way of sort of dodging all of that there. Basically, they're going to be stuck in place for however long it takes. You know, it might be 1200 milliseconds. They're stuck in place because they committed to a swing, And if that swing misses, then they're just basically going to stun themselves for that period of time. This is one of those indirect speed changes that's going to be big, 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 big. And then there's a number of other things that are here. A couple of bosses had changes. Honestly, I've got to say that the Viper Napoatsi changes were a head scratcher for me because, yes, there is a difficult spot in there with those Chaos Rains. They are a reasonably difficult mechanic to deal with, but anyone that is struggling a bit with the Chaos Rains is going to get crushed by the Spear Thrusts. That's the thing that I sort of looked at there. It's like, I'm sort of looking at this and thinking, you've decided you want to make this encounter a little bit easier. Why are you going for the second hardest mechanic in it rather than the hardest one? Because it's still just as hard as it was, except that you have a little bit more, life blast charges, which does matter a lot of the time. So, anyways, that's where they've gone with that. We'll come to that when we go through the actual final patch notes, though, because this is the things that they were talking about. A couple of major things that are going on here, though. Caster weapons are now going to be able to get get runes in them. And on top of this, there is also going to be 2 additional things here. 12 Artificer's Orbs are dropping at fixed locations throughout the campaign, in addition to the slim chances of getting random ones. I think that this is one of the biggest changes in this patch, and it's a really subtle one. It doesn't seem like a big change. Oh, you get an Artificer's Orb here or there. But this is essentially meaning that at all points throughout the campaign, you probably have like 20 to 30% more to your lowest resistance. Or alternately, with the new runes that are added, which I don't think I mentioned in here, with the new runes that have been added, you can also replace that with a boost to attributes. And attributes have been a real problem for a lot of people. So that's something that's substantial there. Now, there's also some future changes coming to charms. I think they've only partially done that so far, and they're working on stash tab affinities. But let's jump into the patch notes as they actually went live. So these are the patch notes. This has been live for approximately 4 hours now, I think. 3.5 or 4 hours, something along those sorts of lines. So it is live. And like I said, it's not been a catastrophic release there. And yes, Sir Moogle in chat is asking, is this a Hollow Knight t-shirt? Yes, it is. Okay. So, let's go through here the changes to Act 3 areas that went live. The dead end in the Drowned City is gone, as well as the part of the level that leads up to it. So this should mean that there's less backtracking than was happening before, and that is always a huge improvement. Of course, if you want to kill additional monsters in the Drowned City, you still can do that. You can still just make a new copy of the zone. If you want to just get more kills than you might have got, in line with the amount you might have got if you full cleared the old version of the zone. And that's going to be the case in general. I think that the more inexperienced a player you are, the less that these changes are likely to affect you in this section, the changes to Act 3 areas, because inexperienced players tend to want to kill more monsters, and they might just make a new copy of some of the zones in order to be able to kill more monsters. Exile had the exact same problem as the Drowned City, and we are doing exactly the same fix. But in addition, it had a second dead end removed where the entrance to the treasure vault is located in the present version of the area. So again, another area that's just been condensed and had a wrong way removed. Apex of Filth, exactly as they originally planned. Azak Bog, they're only talking about a small amount of the changes that I think they were talking about before. I really need to see the Azak Bog in practice, because this was a painful zone in 0.2.0. I think in 0.10 it felt fresh, but 0.20, when you'd done Maya Map a few times, you really didn't like this zone, and I am hoping that they've got this right. I'll know once I actually have played through it again after the changes. Infested Barrens, they have made a change to it that is solely designed to reduce the chance you can accidentally miss the waypoint there. So basically, you'll be forced to find the waypoint in this zone, which then prevents some of the massive, massive backtracking that maybe 1 player in 10 was doing. Most players, this won't affect most playthroughs, but the small number of changes, it will be really, really substantial there. Jungle Ruins is next, and this is going to be made a little bit clearer, one of the exits, and the checkpoint is being moved further, so you're more likely to see it. The area has been made slightly smaller. They've reduced RNG on the Chimeral Wetlands a little bit, and they've just gone and taken some of the worst outcomes you could get and removed them from the pool. So this zone probably still is not going to be anyone's favorite, but the times that it was really, really heinously bad, those ones have been nerfed in the amount of searching that's going to be required. Jukani's Machinarium and Sanctum are going to be a little bit better than they were. This, for me, the main problem was Jukani's Machinarium. It was finding the side boss room, but maybe that was just me the last couple of times I've been through there. I don't think it's going to be... like, I've never had troubles finding the soul cores in that area. However, soul cores in the Sanctum can be a bit worse because apparently they're completely random as to where they are. And then we have the... yeah, other changes have been made there. Matland waterways have been merged together to reduce the number of levers to pull. It's kind of funny. The Matland waterways was a zone that I hated. This was my #1 worst zone in the game in 010. And then in 020, I didn't mind it. And I'm not sure why that was. I think it was probably because of the addition of checkpoints to it. So in 010, if you died 2/3 of the way through the Matland waterways, you were back to the start of the Matland waterways. This is not an enjoyable zone to clear through as a result. Nowadays, it's not quite so painful, but still, obviously, some people had a worse time there than I did. That's why it got a lot of complaints, and that's why it got adjusted. That is the situation there. Increase the instant timeout for areas with side areas off them. This is a casual player only change, but it is a big one. So if you're someone who's fast, this is never going to affect you at all. But if you're someone who is a bit slower, then there'll be times that you go into what you might term a parent zone, and it's got child zones off it, and those child zones are one way. Those child zones are now going to they're now not going to reset in the same way that they did before. And then there's been a couple of other things, but there's this cryptic line I don't like here. I don't like this. The density of areas has been adjusted to account for level generation changes in this patch. That can mean a lot of different things. Does that mean, hey, there's now 70% more monsters in the hunting grounds? Or does this mean, hey, there's now 35% less monsters in Freythorn? We don't know. This could be very big changes. It could be very small changes. I would like them to be clearer as to a list of this area was buffed, this area was buffed, this area was buffed, this area was nerfed, etc., etc. Also, thanks to people in chat commenting on me ticking over 50,000 subs recently. I was glad to hit that on the video I did. I hit it on a video that I put out that was on some of the pressures when there's a wave of negativity or just an overwhelming sentiment in the player base that fall on content creators, and how it can sometimes cause a bit of a risk to people's integrity, where you start finding a situation where there's a strong financial incentive to you to jump on board whatever the common opinion is, whether it's what you actually think or not. And then this creates a scenario where there's a strong tendency towards homogenization of views that are expressed by content creators, which I don't think is good, because even on a patch that's unpopular, like 020 Day 1, there's definitely some individuals that like it, and those individuals' voices are just silenced by this. And that'll be the case with all the sorts of changes that come up. So it's one of those things that's like this invisible bias that kicks in. Now, in this case, I would have said I was mildly negative about 020 Day 1, probably less than Reddit was, but definitely the case that there were people who liked 020 Day 1, and yeah, there just was nothing. Their voices were basically squashed by that whole thing. And yeah, like I said, the whole feeding into the mob when you disagree is the actual sellout, because let's be clear, Grinding Games do not pay me anything, and they don't influence my content in any way. I can be positive or negative, and I can be anywhere in between. I'm extremely negative about the fact that Magic Find still exists in the game. I don't hide that. I'm extremely positive about some of the things that some people don't like, for instance, the decision to remove Orbs of Scouring from Path of Exile 1 to Path of Exile 2. I think this is something that's meant that loot on the ground feels a lot more rewarding than it does in Path of Exile 1, because you can no longer go, oh, I'm just going to use an Orb of Scouring and replicate that item on the ground, and Orbs of Scouring are, I think they're only 20% less common than Chaos Orbs in POE 1, so you get lots of them. So that's something that lots of people in the player base don't agree with, that GGG call. I quite like it, and honestly, I'd like to see. Let's have a hot take here. I'd like to see in Path of Exile 1, which I know not everyone in chat plays, but probably a lot of you do. I'd like to see the rarity of Exalted Orbs and Scouring Orbs swap. So that's basically nerfing the drop rate of Scouring Orbs by a factor of 40 and buffing the drop rate of Exalted Orbs by a factor of 40. I think that would be really, really interesting there. Anyways, so that's a total sidetrack there, but yeah, thanks for the support there that people have commented in chat. So let's talk about the Chaos Inoculation and Bleed changes, because Bleed has been coded in a way that kind of surprised a bunch of people in 0.1.0. Bleed works very, very differently to Path of Exile 1. It originally only considered damage dealt to the target's life. So what this meant was that if you had 50,000 life and 10,000 ES on a monster, and you donked that monster for 8,000 and your hit caused bleed, then your hit was going to drop them to 50,000 life and 2,000 ES. That's no change to their life, and so the bleed did nothing. It was based upon the 0. If you then hit them again for exactly the same damage, you drop them to 44,000 life and 0 ES. So their life has adjusted by 6,000, and that meant the bleed would be based upon that 6,000 life they lost. This is being overhauled completely now. Now, damage dealt to energy shield or to mana can cause bleeding. Chaos Inoculation, however, gains an additional line of text that you are immune to bleed. This is something that it doesn't have in Path of Exile 1, and it's something that's a fairly significant thing there. And then we have the sections on the passive tree that grant additional stun threshold based upon your maximum energy shield, now also grant additional ailment threshold based upon your maximum energy shield. So anything that's intended to mitigate stuns against you based upon your ES is also going to apply to ailments as well. There are going to be dual and time loss dual modifiers to scale this further, and there have been some buffs to dual modifiers for stun threshold and also to time loss dual modifiers for stun threshold. So just a quick recap. I know time loss duals are one of those topics that don't get talked about enough in the Path of Exile community. There was a really broken case with them in 0.1.0. Their interaction with the Adorned was completely off the charts broken for a period. It was not in line with any reasonable reading of what they were meant to do. They were just busted beyond belief. That got fixed, but then people stopped talking about time loss duels all that much. There is the Against the Darkness that comes out of, I'm going to call it Sanctum, that's my Path of Exile 1 brain, but Trial of the Sekhmet here. That's one of those timeless duel effects that causes everything within a radius to get better. But there's a number of other things, there's a number of rare versions of that as well that you can get, and it's just worth keeping in mind that those exist. They're really cool. Anyway, Sorceress specific changes. Arc is getting the modest buff to damage like a really modest buff to damage. We're talking like 10, a bit more than 10%. This is also plus 51, plus 52 on 41. So that is something like, on 410, that's something like 13% more damage than it had, but only at gem level 20. It is getting less than 13% at lower gem levels. I don't actually think, from memory, Arc can't be a gem level 1 gem. But anyways, it's being redesigned quite a bit. It now releases damaging pulses when shocked enemies are hit, but it can no longer cause shock. So Arc now has a slightly different purpose to what it did before. It's more of a combo piece. It's more damaging than it was, but it loses some of its interactions with shock and gains new ones. Well, essentially, you want to be inflicting shock with something else. But if you are inflicting shock with something else, then Arc is going to pay you off for it. Very changed thing there. Very, very changed thing there. Eye of Winter is now gaining additional bonus elemental damage when passing through other elemental orbs. Solar Orb, Orb of Storms, Frostbomb. This is a great change. Eye of Winter lost a lot of its previous identity. It was probably too good in 0.1.0, and so they've decided, right, we're just going to change what it does. And now it's more of a damaging skill, and it's not a debuff skill like it used to be. Fire exposure from Incinerate is better. Mana Tempest can now be used with all spells, and has been changed to cause empowered spells to split to additional targets instead of chaining or forking, which is, splitting is the most powerful projectile mechanic that you can get. but I'd need to refamiliarize myself with Mana Tempest to get a sense as to exactly what that's going to be. Frostbolt explosion radius much bigger now. Free speed build up from Ice Nova and the Frost Nova, the Ice Nova version that is cast near Frostbolt now match. And Ice Nova now has substantially increased freeze build up at all gem levels. And this is going to be basically just an across the board buff to Ice Nova. So it used to only get the 50% boost, and that was only when it was cast on Frostbolt. However, it's important to note that there were some changes to applying freeze to monsters. So freeze on monsters is still, I think, a little bit worse than it was. At the very least, it's not substantially buffed from where it was in 0-1. So let's say the later days of 0-1-0. So 0-1-1 or 0-1-2. So that's something that's getting a sizable tweak there. After this, we have the Frostbomb changes, Mana Remnants. So Frostbomb is just getting a straight numbers buff. Mana Remnants now has a 25% chance to spawn a Remnant on killing an enemy affected by any elemental ailment, not just shock. And it spawns a Remnant on critically hitting a target affected by elemental ailment, but this is capped at 2 seconds. So essentially, this is just getting a few little buffs along the way. Now here we have the really interesting one. Changes to the mechanics of Ignite Proliferation. Ignite Proliferation is something that in Path of Exile 1 is unbelievably strong. It's one of the reasons that people play Ignite, despite Ignite typically having, on comparable levels of gear, like maybe 60-65% less damage than other playstyles. Ignite is just so good in Path of Exile 1 because you can melt entire screens with it. And the reason for that is that there's at least 2, maybe more, different mechanics that cause ignites to just spread. Like, basically, being on fire is like being in love. Everyone can feel the warmth, and it sort of spreads. At least, maybe that doesn't quite work. Anyways, that's one of those things. This is one of the things about doing it live. You come up with silly analogies like that when I'm recording, and I'll cut out a lot of those that fail. When it's live, that doesn't really tend to happen as much. Anyways, spreading ignites, the intention here is that this is a substantial buff, but it's not a pure buff. There is a downside to it as well. So it is now a 2 second, so it's now going from 2 second to 1 second delay. 1 second is still a long time. And so essentially monsters need to stay quite close to each other for a whole second in order for that warmth to spread from one to the other. And then you'll see here again, wildfire support is now changing from 2 meters to 1.5 meters. So basically, this I don't think is enough to make Ignite anything like it is in POE 1, where people play it despite the fact that its numbers are bad. Because with Ignite, you know that you can just set fire to a pack of monsters, and really you only need to light one of them on fire, and then it's contagious. It just gets them all. In 2, the first monster has to actually live long enough, and the surrounding monsters have to live long enough, and a second it's just not a short time at all. It's quite a while. 1 second is, it's dangerous. Anyway, that's the Sorceress specific changes. Number of things there. I feel like the most interesting of these would be the changes to Arc and Eye of Winter. These feel like they're saying, hey, here's some new builds to play around with. We're not going to guarantee yet that they're good, but at least these are saying these are new ways to play this class that are substantial. Whereas a lot of the rest are just like, here's a slightly better number for an existing thing. Huntress specific changes. Parry. Now, note that there is also the monks, I think it's called Killing Palm on the monk, that has been translated over to the Huntress. So parry is the only way to get frenzy charges when you're still using level 1 and 2 gems. Once level 3 gems come online, you've got something new. At level 3 gems, you'll then pick up the ability to get the new monk variant of that. The Huntress version of that monk skill that can grant you a frenzy charge. And so really, the key thing is you've got 2 different choices there. I think that's the most important thing, that you can do the parry combos. And the parry combos, I find, work better. They work better when monsters can't surround you. if monsters can surround you, and there's a number of scenarios where this can come up, you can end up parrying one monster, and then when you go to disengage, your disengage hits something else instead. Color Weak is the name. Thanks, Sir Moogle, for the new ability. But yeah, if the monsters are coming from one direction, you can just put up a parry and then you can disengage and you'll be fine. But if you're surrounded, or even if the monsters are an arc of maybe 90 degrees in front of you, you can easily parry one or two of them, then go for a disengage, but the disengage targets another monster, and you end up missing the ones that have been highlighted with the parry debuff, and that's the real problem there. So that's something that it's just good to have new options for. Actually, that support was added into the game earlier, but it's yeah, like it's basically something that I feel is part of this suite of changes. So parried enemies can no longer evade your attacks. This is for when you are behind the gear curve, because at least I'm thinking here the Amazon though. The Ritualist, I don't know. The Ritualist may not have as much accuracy support. The Amazon should never have any problems with their attacks being evaded anyway, but maybe the Ritualist does. Rapid Assault's expansion now inflicts bleeding on hit, has a larger radius, and the expansion now deals monstrously more damage. So clearly this gem, which I don't think I have played around with, clearly this gem is one that really needed it. Spearfield now has an increased spear duration, 10 seconds rather than 6, and the attack damage scales up quite substantially more at high gem levels. Now, these numbers look tiny. The thing is that Spearfield hits a lot of times. So Spearfield already feels good against any monster that is, say, if its ground profile is at least 2 meters by 2 meters, Spearfield is already feeling good. Already. And then if they get it bigger than that, then it's much better. I really agree with something that's been raised in chat, actually, that the parry bar, which I assume that what you mean by that, Obu, is the bar that indicates how close you are to becoming heavy stunned. That is just too hard to see. That's something that I think really needs a fix there. Herald of Blood now no longer destroys the corpses of rare and unique monsters when they explode, allowing you to use Ritual Sacrifice on the rare monsters. It's one of those things that is like 80% of the time it's a buff, 20% of the time it's a nerf, and that 20% of the time it's going to be really unpleasant. The reason is that one of the advantages of destroying corpses is that sometimes monsters like to go, hey, detonate dead, targeting that thing. And the rare monsters are the ones you don't want them to detonate on you. You'll probably survive getting dead by a magic monster, but a dead from a rare, that's going to go, squish, and that's going to be bad. So, the Huntress specific changes, this is mostly positive, but Herald of Blood, this is going to annoy people sometimes. So, just keep that one in mind. It's one of those ones that you almost feel like it'd be good to have different modes of the skill, but maybe that's just getting a little bit too silly there. Now, warrior-specific changes. The Temper Weapon skill is actually getting buffed from unplayably bad to unplayably bad, I think. I was chatting with Uthgar from Mobalytics recently. He was telling me just how much of a joke this skill is. Is like, apparently it was taking a full second to apply its buff, and then the buff was only being able to be used once. Now, it's going to empower 3 melee attacks instead, but even then, that's like, the only time you're going to use this is if you're fighting a boss that has an invulnerability phase. In that case, yeah, sure. Get your whole 12 empowered attacks and go donk, 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 donk. The thing is that, how often do you fight bosses with invulnerability phases? It's not that often. And chances are this is not going to be decisive in win or lose against those bosses. It's just going to be nice to have there. You want your Ascendancy skills to be something that matter. It does channel 25% faster. Okay, so that means that instead of being 3 seconds to get 3 attacks, it's now 2.4 seconds, because 25% faster doesn't mean 25% less time. It means that 4 seconds counts as 5 seconds. So 2.4 seconds is going to get you 12 attacks, which is, this is a 400% buff, and it is still probably trash. And on top of that, the damage increase isn't as high as it used to be. Yeah, Temper Weapon can just go completely forgotten about. I just can't really imagine this at all. It's yeah, this just, really needs to be something entirely different. Like this would be much more interesting if it was like 300 milliseconds to apply, 60-second duration, gain fizz added as extra fire at some number that feels right for an ascendancy notable, which is probably well, I'm saying fizz added as fire, but generic damage added as fire, maybe 12, 13, 14, 15%, something like that would feel like it's at least serviceable. And the small amount of nuisance of channeling it once every now and again, yeah. Anyways, let's just forget this thing exists. The Smith of Katavari is a good ascendancy, but it is not a good ascendancy because of this node. This node, you just treat the entire ascendancy as though this node doesn't exist. Shield Wall can now be detonated by Warcries as well as by slams. I'm not familiar enough with that skill to know how significant that is. Armor break inflicted on players is getting massively nerfed. So, 4 seconds instead of 12, and we mentioned this before at the start of the video, but this needs to be said again. This is not a warrior-specific change. Grinding Games put it in the wrong spot in the patch notes. This is a huge buff to the survivability of characters that run a non-zero but small amount of armor, just because the gear that they happen to own, like Moroya Invictus, has a small amount of armor on it. Fully broken armor inflicted on players no longer causes the player to take increased physical damage. This is enormous, and this is not a warrior-specific change. This is a monstrous, 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 monstrous change here. Ranger-specific changes. We have Stormcaller's Arrow Bolt is now getting a substantial buff to impact radius, and it's also going to proliferate shocks in certain circumstances as well. Lightning Rod is now dealing substantially more damage. That is just a flat 30% more, and now has a maximum arrow duration that's higher as well. Lightning Arrow's beam targeting radius is now 25% larger than it was, and Tornado Shot now has a maximum tornado duration of 15 seconds at all gem levels, previously 7 to 7.9. So what we're seeing here, I think, is a pattern. Grinding Gear Games have made a decision that I think has really been a bad one. This decision was to announce that they were no longer going to do mid-league nerfs except in emergencies. Because of that, what they have to do is balance everything pretty low at the start of the league and then go through and like, okay, that's an egregious underperformer, we can buff that, da-da-da-da-da. I would much rather that they go, okay, we're going to balance things where we think is right, and then if it turns out that we've made a disastrous mistake, then we'll nerf it. And then you can have the build diversity without having this feeling that the first week everyone's really, really weak. Interesting point there that Stan's making in chat. Apparently, after this change to armor breaks, it's still the case that Rogue Exiles can exploit broken armor on us, but Rogue Exiles follow player rules, so that's interesting there. Other player balance. Rally support is no longer restricted to certain attacks. It's just any melee attacks that you use yourself. And Glory is no longer consumed if you're interrupted while using the skill. So this only applies to 2 of the slowest and hardest hitting skills in the game. Hammer of the Gods used to be a long cooldown skill, but they changed it to be essentially you gain points towards using this skill when you heavy stun monsters. And Spear of Solaris is the same. So if you're inflicting heavy stuns, then the payoff becomes that you get to use these big finisher abilities at some point. And if you're interrupted while using these skills, you don't burn the glory, which is important because these are very, very, very big skills. Having one of these interrupted is painful. Like, these things are quite painful there. Someone's pointing out Timber Weapon wasn't functioning at all previously. Well, maybe it's so you're saying it just was doing nothing at all. That's interesting. It's like, the numbers on it was so bad that people had told me it was terrible from having tried it. But maybe if it wasn't working at all, then maybe it'll be like something that, even then, it's just mechanically so bad that no one's going to use it anyway. Like, unless it hits the screen. If it hits the whole screen, yeah, okay, I'll accept it, then it's got some use. But if it doesn't hit the whole screen, like, what are you getting? For all the time you're investing into using it, you're just getting, oh, here's a localized AoE that only does a small amount of damage. 290% of attack damage, like, that's, yeah. This is like, stand still for a couple of seconds to get that. It's, yeah. Rubbish skill, anyway. even if it wasn't working at all, and so it's therefore being fixed so that it does something. The numbers are so bad that like it's got to hit the whole screen or it's not worth it. And it's got to hit a massive Nova, not just a small one. And even then, what's the point? Like, I guess it's sort of some sort of clear on a build that otherwise doesn't have it, but surely you can get clear from Spirit Gems. That's better than that. Now, Inhibitor is the next support gem that's being added, and this one was something they said originally that they were going to be adding this without the damage bonus, but the key thing here is that Inhibitor prevents the skill from consuming charges. This is something that is really, really specific in what you're doing with it. This is where you want to say, okay, I want to use Lightning Spear on my character, but I want to conserve my Frenzy charges for something else. That's the purpose of Inhibitor. Inhibitor is not for most people to use. It provides a small amount of damage, but it's not very much. The key thing is that it's that ability of saying, I want to conserve my Frenzy charges, but I still want to use this skill that wants to consume them, but I'm only going to get the small version of the Lightning Spear. So if you're okay with the small version of Lightning Spear that doesn't consume a Frenzy charge, this is what it's there for. And that's going to be something that's, that's basically very, very niche. The vast majority of people don't want this, but it's there for you if you do. Delirium encounters now last 2.5 times longer, and the front of the expansion continues expanding while you're doing other mechanics, but the back of the fog will still pause, which is something that comes up occasionally. And strongboxes now also pause Delirium Fog on opening as well as on completion. So that's something, like Delirium is basically being made more user-friendly than it was before. Here's those monster speed changes again. Now, we mentioned the key thing is the changes that they're making to monster interrupts. So if a monster is moving at 110% player's movement speed, then they're going to have to commit to their attacks, and that's going to lock them down for a long time. What this means is that if you're actively running away from a monster that's slightly faster than you, it is much rarer that it's going to be able to attack you, and as a result, you're going to be a lot safer than you were before. This is going to particularly apply to Cultists in Freythorn, Faradun, and Tribal Humans in Act 3. Now, Haste Aura modifier no longer appears on monsters that are already fast. This is listed as Act 1, and I don't know if that's the case or not. Really, I feel like the Haste Aura monster mod is something that probably belongs quite deep into endgame. Sort of thing that I think should come online at yellow maps rather than earlier than that. Now, certain fast monsters have a walking stance and a running stance now. They'll go into a walking stance after making a melee attack, and then after that, they'll only begin running again if you attempt to disengage completely from them. So this is something where these monsters are instead going to be able to speed up to catch up to you if you are evading them. But if you're not actively evading them, if you're just trying to reposition a bit, then they're going to be walking to you slowly. Hungering Stalker is one of the fastest monsters in the game. They are not getting any nerfs to their speed. Granny Gear Games mentioned the rationale for this in their interview with Zizaran the other day. They want to have a small number of monsters that are faster than the player, but that are easy to kill. And that's the intention here. 12% less life, 12% less damage. They're going to be easy to just mow down if they start chasing you. I do think that monsters that are this fast probably shouldn't be able to get a couple of the rare monster mods. The Mana Drain Aura is one that comes to mind that can be a bit dangerous in situations like that. So that's something that is... that's something that's sort of almost there, but not necessarily exactly right. A number of nasty monsters are getting slowed. Oh, sorry, not slowed. A number of nasty monsters are getting their numbers culled. So Bloom Serpents in the Red Veil, Venomous Crabs, and Venomous Crab Matriarchs in the Hunting Grounds. Those things are sketchy, really sketchy. Various nerfs to the Cultists in Freythorn, and they've also been reduced in numbers. The exploding blood pools from Blood Cretins, which I think are in the second last zone of Act 1, they're going to have a more clear demarcation of where their danger zone is, and they're going to last for 4 seconds instead of 6. I am not sure they need to be 4 seconds. I feel like on death effects that are just like that are damage over time ground, I feel like a more appropriate duration for those is like 1.5 to 2.5 seconds. Something that like 4 seconds feels like quite a while, even with the slightly slower combat speed of Path of Exile 2 than Path of Exile 1. That's pretty substantial. Reduce the overall density of more challenging monsters in Ogham Manor. This is a hard zone. This is a zone that I have definitely died a lot of times in, and I've got to play through it again. I need to... This is one that, like, whatever second character I make, I'll be able to assess how Ogham Manor is going to feel after that. It's a good point that Zeph makes as well. They destroy all minions, these blood pools. And that's something that, again, Grinding Gear games have a solution for that in PoE 1. It's more applied to boss slams, but boss slams have an additional line on them that's like a coding line that's like damage to player minions minus 90%, or sometimes even minus 99%, for things that minions are just too stupid to dodge, but that are meant to be killing strikes if they hit the player. A good example of this, I think, is the Maven's memory game explosion. That thing, it's meant to do, like, I think something along the lines of 60,000 damage split between the 3 elements. So it's meant to be a killing strike. It's not impossible to tank it, but it's designed to not be reasonable to tank. And then if it just hits a minion, it just nukes them. But then they provide a lot of those abilities have nerfs to the amount of damage that they do there. So, anyways, going through here, we have Boulder Ants have been replaced by Risen Maraketh in the Valley of the Titans. I'm trying to place which monsters these are. I don't actually know their names. Density of monsters in this area has been adjusted. Hopefully it's been increased because the Valley of the Titans feels really sparse. The Faradun have been modified to remove the interrupt effects as described above. Diatusk Boar and Antillan Charger are now more likely to push you to the side instead of pushing you along with them. So these are some of the monsters in Act 3 that are way tankier than anything else around them. And they're designed, like, they're big, they're obvious. You know, okay, this is a mini boss, even though it's not even a magic monster. And they're the ones that, yeah, just basically charge at you. They're huge. They have very high stats for their zone, but they're also not very smart. Lost City monster pack composition has been adjusted to result in fewer range monsters. Massively adjusted the Azak Bog, as mentioned before, but also changed the monster composition to have less ranged monsters and less elite monsters. And in the Venom Crypts, chaos damage instead of physical damage was happening on one of the monsters. That is being changed. That's strange. I would have thought that a poison spray would deal chaos damage rather than physical damage. That's really weird. Anyways, I've already mentioned there was a head scratcher of a change to Viper Napawazi because some people have had the opposite experience to me, but I find the Chaos Rain really easy to dodge and not very punishing if you make a mistake on it. I think from memory, it's usually kind of hits you for like 28% of your life usually when you're running it. So you can tank 3 of them, but if you hit 3 times, the third one is a crisis, right? Whereas the spear thrusts, although they're somewhat telegraphed, but they're hard to see because the telegraphs are on opposite side of the screen, and they are 2 hit. They are 2 shots. So that's one of those things I feel is like an interesting decision. And Arakali's Web is the term I'm talking about with the spear thrust, yeah. Warrior Avi is mentioning the same thing in chat. So I kind of feel it's strange to nerf the second most dangerous thing, except if the fight was primarily an endurance fight. I think most people that lose on Viper Napawazi, they die when they still have flask charges left. I could be wrong on that. And so, yeah, it's sort of really, really, really strange to make the second most dangerous part of that fight easier. Anyway, we'll see how it feels in practice when I next fight her. Now, Uxmal the Beast Lord and Xylucian, these are bosses that are tied to the Trials of Chaos. If you're trying to work out what they are, that's what they're from. Because that's meant to be unclear. Player minion damage. Player minion changes. Minion revive timers are being buffed substantially. If most of your minions are dead, then your minion revive time will be short. However, if one of your minions dies, it will reset. So it'll reset to this new shorter time. I hope they get the numbers on this right. There's one of those things that, like, the existence of skills like Detonate Dead causes a lot of problems here. And that's something that's really, really sort of messy there in terms of exactly how to work. Disenchanting a Bind Spectre or Tame Beast gem will unbind them, allowing you to use them again. And Tame Beasts can now fit through gaps of the same size the player can. Yeah, that's one that's kind of needed. Okay, crafting changes. This is something I didn't realize they were doing. They're going to be adding, well, they have already added mods to, they've added runes to cast weapons. So let me just find the right one here. That's not the right one. Great Desert Rune. Here, so Wand or Staff, gain 12% of damage added as extra fire damage. This is a new ability that's been added to these runes. It is not quite every single rune because the new runes don't have Wand or Staff mods on them. But this is something that's going to be a little bit of a power boost to people that are using a Wand or a Staff. On top of that, there is now going to be a blank rune which Renly can forge into an elemental rune of your choosing in case you didn't find the right one up to that point. And the big thing, 12 Artificer's Orbs added to fixed locations throughout the campaign. This is going to be the decisive thing in making campaign gearing just feel a lot smoother, I think. This is going to be, like, at the moment, it feels like it's the only agency you have over getting the right gear for your character is Magic Find, and also disenchanting things that grant Artificer's Shards. But Artificer's Shards, at least has been my experience, that you get a lot more items that have sockets on them if you've got Magic Find. So basically, this is something that is independent of the mess that is Magic Find, and that is going to provide a way to get a little bit of a boost in your crafting throughout the campaign. On top of that, we have these runes for your attributes. 10 to Dexterity, 10 to Dexterity on the Greater Adept runes, 8 and 8 on the middle, and then surprisingly 5 and 6 on the lesser, which I wasn't really expecting. These are stat requirements have been fairly painful, and honestly, it's one of the things I like the most about Path of Exile 1's tree and early gearing progress. You're often short on attributes, but you have solutions. You've got those 30 attribute nodes on the tree that are only 1 point, usually path right next to them, and they'll be for the attributes that you've got lowest of. And there's a bunch of other things as well that are along the way. So yeah. So Moogle is indicating feeling like you're picking up a lot more socketed items through Act 1. So Moogle, have you got Magic Find on that character? Because it is anecdotally, I cannot prove this, but anecdotally it feels like you get way more socketed items if you've got like 40% character rarity. Finally, rare monsters show up on the minimap all the time. None of this, you got to kill all but 200 monsters, or 50 as it was on day 1. Now you don't have to do that, you just get all the rare monsters to appear. Rune in a fixed location in the Titan Grotto is pretty much a nothing thing. Armored Scraps and Blacksmith's Whetstones found in the Morden Quarry. I had never associated that zone with those. And then we have a few other little changes here. We already had the Antlion Changer thing here. And then Wrathbreaker is getting nerfed. So this is one of those bosses that could really rip you apart, Wrathbreaker. This is the first boss in Act 2, and it's before you get to the caravan. This was the absolute massacre point for hardcore characters on day 1 of the game starting, because Wrathbreaker just does a lot of physical damage and has a lot of minions that do physical damage, but way more than anything else up to that point. Added lighting to Rogue Exiles to make it less likely that you lose track of them, and monsters have had their capacity to push the player nerfed a bit. After that, we have 1,000,001 sections for bug fixes. So this is going to be mostly underwhelming, but we'll have a quick look to see if there's anything I missed earlier. Divine Orbs were affecting fractured modifiers, so that's now fixed. And that's the sort of thing that, like, if you're one of the early people pushing crafting, you tend to get hit by some of those sorts of bugs. But that's now fixed at this point. Fix a bug where unique jewels that affect passives in radius were not functioning correctly with small attribute passive skills or small class specific passive skills. So this is for Against the Darkness primarily. And also, what's the name of that jewel? That Timeless Jewel. I can't think of the name of the Timeless Jewel at the moment. Nightly something. Nightly Tenets, I think. Fix a break where partial armor break had an infinite duration if you or the target never had broken armor. And oh yeah, here we go. The combust from Temple Weapon skill. This is what was mentioned before by the person with the name that I couldn't pronounce. That it wasn't working at all, but still, yeah, it just everything about that seems so bad that I guess we'll see. Hopefully, I'm wrong on that. Hopefully, I'm wrong, and the Temple Weapon skill is useful, but just was failing to deal damage entirely. I do hope I'm wrong on that, but let's put it this way. If I was rolling a Smith of Katava at the moment, I would be taking the 2 mods that are from the Path of Exile 1 Chieftain. I will call them Tassalio and Valaco. I can't remember what they're called, but they're the ones that make fire resistance modifiers apply to other resists. And then I would be putting 4 points into a chest armor. After that, we have Whirlwind Lance just skedaddled when supported by Fork. I kind of wish I'd seen that. I didn't actually end up using that. Fixed a bug where it was possible to apply Thorns damage to yourself, such as through using the Crown of the Pale King and Fireflower unique items. I will bet you that someone found something that was ridiculous with that I didn't know about. Someone. I don't know what it was. I don't know what it will be, but that's definitely going to be the case. Someone will have found something silly. Electrocute wasn't counting towards effects that cared about the magnitude of ailments on enemies. Sorry, the quantity of them. And Essence of the Infinite is being nerfed. It was dealing damage too early. So that's something that should make it much more reasonable to fight those things. Otherwise, everything else seems to be pretty small there. So that is basically the patch. This is the patch notes for it. The most decisive things here, changes to Act 3 areas, the changes to socketable items. For some people, it will be the Chaos Inoculation and Bleed changes. The changes to the, to a bunch of different classes. There's a few things there that are significant, but the one that is listed under the Warrior is huge. And then there's the monster speed changes. These are the most decisive thing, but there's a lot of little things as well. I feel like this is basically the entirety of the patch. This doesn't need to be a super long patch notes discussion because we've kind of already had those when the main patch notes came out. But basically, I think this is looking pretty good. I'm going to leave it there. If people have joined the stream late, you will be able to rewind it. It's just going to be it's going to be functionally a normal YouTube video. The only difference is that I don't get to edit them down as much afterwards. And I am going to leave it there. May your Varlobs have interesting results, and I will see you all around.